Welcome, family. Welcome back to another presentation on the Juice Bar channel. Topic teaching for tonight, going right on in. There was no slavery in Africa. I repeat, there was no slavery in Africa. Despite the teachings from your teachers, professors, some impressions left in the media, movies, and such like, I'm here to state and claim definitely there was no slavery in Africa. And we make that argument very clear. What was in Africa was servitude, indentured servitude, not chattel slavery. Indentured servitude was practiced in the countries of Asia, some countries in Europe, some countries in Africa. But chattel slavery was never practiced on any of those countries which we just named. Indentured servitude was practiced in the America North and the America South. But it transformed itself from indentured servitude to chattel slavery in America South. Chattel slavery was erected in America South. Then it was perfected in America North. But there was no chattel slavery in Europe, in Asia, or Africa. And the blurring of those lines where people are now thinking to themselves, it was slavery in Africa because you are categorizing indentured servitude as the same as chattel slavery. That is not correct. That is not correct. And this teaching has gone forward for over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, if not longer. I've heard this teaching over the decades of my own life. So I'm now taking the time in 10 minutes to dispel that decade-old lie, if you will. Whether it be a purposeful misteaching or a misconception based out of ignorance, truth will have to combat it. The juice going to have to get at it. And here we go. One argument is that Africans sold other Africans into slavery. That's simply not possible. No African ever sold any other African into slavery because chattel slavery at that time did not exist. The concept, the ideal, the ideology of it was non-existent. The Africans who sold Africans to Europeans was a very, very small minority, less than 10%. And when they sold these Africans to Europeans, they sold them under the ideology of indentured servitude, which was practiced all throughout Africa and all throughout the rest of the civilized world. And the Africans that did that was a small minority. How do we know this? Because we know of the technological advancement of the European at that time. As they come out of their dark ages in the 1400s, mid 1400s, late 1400s, they get gunpowder from the Asian countries and they get the steel from the Africans, and they concoct an invention called the gun, or also known as the Great Equalizer. And from this newfound European technology, they were now able to go into Africa and extract by tribe, citizen by citizen to the new Americas. The European went in with guns and they extracted African by African, tribe by tribe. There's a lot to be said about that. Let me slow that down. One more time. Europeans went in with their new technology, the Great Equalizer, the power of the gun, and they began human trafficking, human kidnapping. And it was readily available for them to do so from their newfound technology and from the way Africans are set up in tribes between that 1 AD to 1400 AD time period. Why are Africans in tribes, Bar? Because of the invasions. Europeans in the 1400s can go into Africa, extract Africans easily because they are in tribes because of the invasions. The first invasions of the African nation was done by or classified as the people of Africa. They classified the first invaders as Asians. That's thus the term invasions. This was in 4000 BC. They got rid of them at the 500 years. 3500 BC, they're clean and clear of outsiders. They erect their first dynasty, and they have already built some of their monuments. And then around that 700 BC time period comes more invaders in the form of the Persians. They get them out. Then comes the Greeks in 300 BC. They get them out. Then the Romans around 30 BC. That's who they could not get out. The Romans got them out, in fact. And then when the fall of Rome took place, the Europeans go into their dark ages between that 500 BC to about 500 AD to about 1400 AD time period. And then when the European comes out of their dark ages with their new technology, they invade Africa from the tribes. 1 AD to 1400 AD, Africa is now in tribes from the Roman invasions and the Roman Empire. So they had countries like Mali, Songhai, Ethiopia, great civilizations before European invasions, but they were still under tribes which began in that 1 AD time period at the fall of ancient Egypt, the fall of Kemet, the fall of the Western Nile Valley area. The first, let me back up. So then, yes, let me say that. The first slaves, quote unquote slaves, are not Africans. The first slaves are Eastern Europeans, thus the term Slav. The root word in slavery is Slav. And the first enslavers were the Arabs at the rise of Islam. And I want to make a note. There's a difference between Arabism and Islam. There's a difference between Arabism and Islam. Okay, I spent much time in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Dubai, and Syria, Lebanon. I spent much time out there. And although they are Muslim regulated societies, everyone there is not a Muslim or not a practicing Muslim. So going back to that 700 AD time period at the rise of Islam, you also see human trafficking by Arabs, and they're trafficking Eastern European Slavs, thus the term slavery. And we already made mention where the word invasion came from the 4000 BC invasions of the people adjacent east of Afrika. And they were classified as Asians, and their actions were invasive or invasions. Yes. Moving right on down. Coming right on down. Bear with me 1 second. Coming right on down. I want to make sure I hit everything here. Yes, okay, one last point. Two more points. When the indentured service system got to America South and America North, as we may mention, it later transformed itself into chattel slavery. That began in South America, and then it was taken on by North America. Some of America's first lobbyists, people who had influence over government officials, lobbyists. Some of America's first lobbyists were the plantation owners. Some of the first presidents and governors were slave and plantation owners. We know this. So they were able to transform the system from indentured service to chattel slavery right here in America North, following the lead that took place in America South. And these are the two continents where chattel slavery only ever took place. Chattel slavery never took place in Europe, never took place in Africa, never took place in Asia. Only in America South and America North, at the back of the mid-Atlantic slave trade. And what we have to understand is how did it transform and why did it transform? It transformed simply for profit. Just that simple. Profit. The plantation owners, the European plantation owners, because there were actually African or black plantation owners in America at one point in time. The original inhabitants of America are people of melanin or people that have melanin. The descendants of the Incas, Mayas, and Aztecs are the descendants of the Olmecs. Their monuments, their sculptures are in Mexico right now as we speak. They are once again the descendants of the Western Nile Valley people. I want to reference the book by Dr. Ivan van Sertima. They were here before Columbus. They were here before the Europeans. However, after indentured servitude transformed itself in North America, as it did in South America, to chattel slavery, many of the prosperous blacks or those that have melanin were done away with. And they began to take on the sentiment of, or shall I say, the country began to take on the sentiment of whiteness. Whiteness also began on the plantation system or with the plantation system. I now reference Professor Tim Wise as he speaks on it, because he explained how whiteness came into existence on the plantation. And he explained how the plantation became a plantation. Because at one point in time, as we said, indentured servitude was in America. And the plantation owners were African and European. But when the European plantation owners began to hear the African indentured servants talking with the European indentured servants, and they were saying things like, why are we working sun up to sundown, being paid pennies, while the plantation owner is living his best life at our expense? The plantation owner heard this, and he began to immediately put a wedge in between the African indentured servant and the European indentured servant. He did this by changing indentured servitude to chattel slavery. Now the African indentured servant is going to be a slave all his days. And his children's children will be servants or slaves all their days. And the white or the European indentured servants will now be transformed into overseers on the plantation in close proximity to the plantation owner. And they will have that white privilege on that plantation. And that's how that term white got started. That's how the plantation transformed to an indentured service one to chattel slavery. And yes, we will go back to our original statement. There was no slavery in Africa. Chattel slavery only took place in America North and also in America South. I think we leave it at that. I think we'll leave it at that, family. One last thing. Put the book up. And one part in the chapter goes right here in Black Swan Phenomena. Keep in mind, this book is not about racism and things of that nature. It's a book, it's a spinoff of the Kybalion. It's a book which marks the spiritual, scientific concepts of the Western Nile Valley people, of the ancient Africans, before the invasions of the Asians in 4000 BC and the invasions of the Roman Empire in 1 AD or 30 BC to 1 AD, and the invasions of the Europeans in the 1400 time period. But right here, we're going to go right to this one page in this book on page 109. I'm closed right here. It says this: racism attacks the human race. Conjunctions, insurrections, revolutions, and pandemics occur in cycles. This is according to the rhythm of the universe. All pandemics fall under the law of rhythm. The Great Plague of Marseilles, the cholera and yellow fever pandemic, the influenza pandemic, the C-19 pandemic. And it shows how these are all separated in time, approximately about 100 years. Let's continue reading on down. Yet it is the institution of racism, particularly in the past 400 years, which brings us to this point in the book. We would say about 500 years, but nonetheless, we'll go there. Not ignoring the difference between chattel slavery and indentured servitude. A key point of difference to the levels of psychological and physical oppression, primarily for profit. What was the difference between two? One had a greater force of psychological and physical oppression for profit, thought from the ancestors of Kemet, or ideals from Kemet, explaining universal times, regardless of history's distortions. What are the distortions of history that the book is now referencing? Once again, by blurring the lines between indentured servitude and chattel slavery, by suggesting and influencing and making the listener or reader believe that they are one and the same when they are completely different. These are two completely different systems. That's why the book refers to it as the distortions of history. Family, we're done for the night. We went a little longer than expected. But these are the type of teachings that we will present on the Juice Bar. Please subscribe. Please follow. Please do your homework and your research on the presentations given. But we challenge this. We are pushing for this. We encourage this. We're trying to raise the line of thought within ourselves to the outer world. Come join us in this 4-year journey as we build our educational library. Once again, there was no slavery in Africa. It was only indentured servitude. And indentured servitude and chattel slavery are not the same. Indentured servitude is servitude. Chattel slavery is slavery. Peace.